The opening program of our season is quite spectacular. It has three pieces which are very contrasting and ends up being an evening which is very fulfilling. To begin with, we have a Mozart flute quartet. Mozart is known to have disliked the flute, and actually his only real solo flute pieces came about, as many things do for composers, when he saw the opportunity to make some money. And this was through a gentleman whom he met who played the flute and commissioned him to write several pieces for the flute. There were supposed to be a number of flute quartets. That would be flute with a string trio, and also 2 flute concertos. Mozart managed to finish one of the concerti and renegotiated his contract for half the money in order to not even write the second concerto, which he didn't want to. Having said all of that, this particular flute quartet, the D major out of 3 of them, has one of the most beautiful slow movements imaginable, and hearing it, one is hard put to understand that the composer didn't like the flute, because it is simply gorgeous. The slow movement has the most beautiful solo line, accompanied completely by the 3 strings playing only pizzicato. And this creates a texture which allows the flute to not really worry about volume and simply spin out this beautiful melodic line. The second piece on the program has many, many connections to the festival. It is a string trio written by the virtuoso bass player Edgar Meyer. And it's quite unusual in its context for us because it was, first of all, the first piece that Edgar wrote that he considered to be a full-length, written-out piece in what he would think of as classical genre. It's unusual in that the string trio, instead of being violin, viola, cello, which we're accustomed to, is violin, cello, and bass. And Edgar wrote it in the first place because he wanted to play with 2 friends of his, Daniel Phillips and Brey, and there was simply no music to be played. So he was forced to write this. It became very significant in his output and in his life journey between this kind of folk pop genre, which he plays magnificently, and what he sees as true classical composition. So this was the first full-length piece, and it was premiered by the festival about 40 years ago. We are bringing back those same original players with Edgar and presenting it on our opening program. I have always been fascinated by Edgar as in this role as a classical composer, because he didn't have the kind of formal training that composers go through, but he has such a tremendous instinct for music as a performer. and such a tremendous instinct for the impact that pieces have on an audience, that he manages always to do something which is really critical in writing a long piece, and that is the instant when, as an audience, you start to think, well, that's kind of gone on for a while. Before you can say while, he changes the texture. He changes what's going on and keeps you constantly engaged. It's written with three virtuosos in mind, and the last movement particularly is one of the most incredible display pieces for these three instruments, particularly the bass, because we're not accustomed to the gymnastics that a player like Edgar can perform. And it's a wonderful piece for the audience, exuberant, fascinating, and engaging. To finish this program, we go in a completely different world, and that is the world of Tchaikovsky. We know Tchaikovsky from the ballets that are embedded in our heads, as well as from the symphonies, the big pieces, the piano concerto, concerti, the violin concerto, etc. What is more limited and unusual is the chamber music output. And actually, besides string quartets, we have a total of 2 pieces. Both of those pieces happen to be tremendous, majestic, and monumental. The string sextet, otherwise titled the Souvenir de Florence, and this piano trio, which we're going to hear. The piano trio is a monumental work written in only 2 movements. The first movement begins as a kind of elegy with a very memorable tune played by the cello. And this has significance as the piece moves on. After this memorable introduction, the first movement becomes symphonic. The piano playing is symphonic. The demands on the strings are symphonic, and it's a really massive piece. The only other movement is the second movement, and it also is monumental. It's based on a folk song. The whole genesis of the trio came from Tchaikovsky's interactions with 2 very famous Russian brothers, Rubinstein, Nikolai and Alexander. And Nikolai was the head of the conservatory in Moscow, where Tchaikovsky was engaged as a professor. But at the death of Anton, who was a great pianist, Tchaikovsky felt that he needed to write something in the memory of, which is what this trio is. The theme from the second movement, which is this folk song, came from an encounter where Tchaikovsky and other people engaged at the conservatory all went on an outing with Nikolai into the country for a picnic. And at this picnic, Nikolai found some peasants in the area who came and sang a song. This song stayed with Tchaikovsky and became the theme for this massive second movement, which consists otherwise of a set of variations. Each variation features one of the instruments, sometimes two of them, sometimes together, and one of the most memorable variations is a long, fantastic mazurka for the piano. After these variations build and come to a great climax, instead of what one would expect in a kind of massive finale, Tchaikovsky comes back to the original mournful lament at the beginning of the first movement. And this kind of funeral march with an unforgettable melody concludes the piece and finishes our program.